Hello guys, welcome to today's lecture. Today I want us to look at how to derive quadratic formula. When you're deriving quadratic formula, first I want you to know what is a quadratic equation. A quadratic equation is an equation with the form ax squared plus bx plus a constant c equals to 0. This is what we actually call a quadratic equation. For instance, we can have this equation. We can have an equation like 4x squared plus 3x plus maybe 2 equals to 0. Then this will become a quadratic equation. As long as we are starting with the x being power 2, x power 1, then x power 0, that becomes our quadratic equation. So we want to look at how to derive the quadratic formula. Let us derive the quadratic formula. To derive the quadratic formula, we do this using completing the square. So for instance, you can be given the following equation. Given the following quadratic form equation, or I can call it function. This one, you are taught to solve the value of x. Solve the value of x using quadratic formula, using completing the square. The reason I'm saying completing the square is because if you want to derive the quadratic formula, you can only do so by using completing the square method. Completing the square method. That's how you can solve and get the quadratic formula. So let's have the solution. So the solution is this one. So we have our quadratic equation is ax plus bx plus c equals to 0. We know when we are driving quadratic, when you are using completing the square, we have condition. And the first condition is that the value of x should be 1. So the value of x squared term should be 1. The other condition is that the equation should be equals to 0, and of course this one is equals to 0. So let's make this value to be equals to 1. But the first thing we do before we make it to be equals to 1, we shift this to the other side. So this becomes ax squared plus bx equals, when you take plus c to the other side, it becomes minus c. So now we want to make this x, the value of x squared, to be 1. So I'll divide here by, I'll write this x squared plus bx equals to negative c. I divide here by a, I divide this by a, I divide this by a. That means this cancels, and I'm left with x squared plus b over a, x equals to negative c over a, equals to negative c over a. I'll pick it up from here. So now we have this. We have x squared plus b over a, x equals negative c over a. Now, when we are using completing the square, we know that we take this b, we take our b divided by 2. So we need to take this value and divide it by 2. So we know for completing the square, we say x squared plus b over a. This is my b term. I will divide this by half. So when I take b over a, multiply by half, this gives me, which is actually dividing by half, this one gives this one gives b over 2a. So that means you have b over a x plus b over 2a. And I put here squared equals to minus c over a. I also add this the same so that I don't change the meaning. This is also squared. I want to maintain the meaning of the equation, that is using completing the square. So I need to add b over 2a and b over 2a here, so that I don't interfere with the totals in the equation or the meaning of the equation. So from here, we know from completing the square, you will pick this and pick this. You pick those two, you pick that, so let me pick that. So I will have x plus b over 2a. Then I square this and I say this equals to, minus c over a plus b. This one I can simplify this. I can have b squared over 4a squared. 4a squared. Then, now we can still simplify this further. So now, I can make 4a a common denominator. So I have x plus b over 2a, this is squared, equals to minus c over a plus, I want to make it a common denominator here, plus b squared. To make it a common denominator, here we have an a. I look for LCM. I look for LCM of a and 4a squared. We have what we call the LCM, least common multiplier. So I look for that. So that will mean it is 4a. So I'll take 4a and multiply up here. So my 4c here, this one becomes, I need to have a common denominator. This becomes negative 4ac. I take this multiply by c. Then since this one, I maintain the same, plus b squared. I can write this and say this equals to b squared minus, I'm just changing this to the other side, minus 4ac over 4a squared x plus b over 2a squared. Now to solve from there, we get the square root. We get the square root here. And we also get the square root of all this. To get this square root, we can simplify. We know the square root of the squared becomes x plus b over 2a. This equals to, the numerator we can't get the square root, so we know the answer that we shall get for the numerator will be plus or minus. For the denominator, square root of 4 is 2. Square root of a squared is actually a. Then we make x to be the only subject, so we have x equals to, so you have b squared minus 4ac. X equals to, we take this b over 2a to the other side. So we say this is, since it was a positive, when you take it to the other side, it becomes a negative over 2a plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Since you have a common denominator, then you can say x equals to, we put the common denominator 2a minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. And this is the square root. So we shall have solved the value of x using the quadratic formula. So this is actually the quadratic formula. Thank you.